Good morning, everyone. This is Ezekiel chapter 1. I have a sneaking suspicion this may be a 2-week study of the chapter. This is such a tremendously mysterious and widely discussed chapter in the Tanach. It is Ezekiel's vision of the
Can't hear
fiery.
you.
No?
I can hear you.
Maybe turn up your
Can't
volume.
hear you.
Okay, hold on a second. I think it may just be you. One moment.
Okay.
Any better, Susan?
Yes, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So this is certainly one of the most mysterious and widely discussed chapters of the Tanakh. It's Ezekiel's vision of the fiery chariot of God. And I'm going to begin just by showing you a couple of sources that single out the unique quality of this chapter. Then we will read and discuss the chapter. And I think, it'll be interesting just to ask you if you're so interested to just kind of reflect on what the chapter evokes. On the one hand, it's very hard to understand, and on another hand, while certain things you can't tell exactly what Ezekiel is saying or seeing, you get a feeling for it, and just almost like looking at a picture. After we read through the depiction, it'll be interesting just to say, what feelings does this evoke? How it is so descriptive and colorful, that I'll be curious really just for our initial reactions to the vision itself. But let us begin just by noticing the unique status that this chapter has in Jewish tradition. We can start out before we even get into the text of the chapter itself, by noticing this. The Mishnah in Tractate Megillah, chapter 4, which is kind of a Gabai's guide. It goes through various rules of what things are read on certain days and holidays. Mentions certain passages from the Torah and the Tanakh that maybe shouldn't be read altogether, or they should be read, but they shouldn't be translated. There was a long-standing custom, which is still practiced in some Yemenite congregations, that line by line in the Torah reading, it was read in the original biblical Hebrew, and then someone would translate into the vernacular. So some of these are things which we're not going to say you don't read them out loud when you do the Torah reading, but don't translate them. Don't try to explain them to people. Too complicated, too rife with potential misunderstanding. And when we get to the question of prophetic readings, the question becomes, can you read these as the Haftarah readings? We know that, as we've often discussed, various passages from the prophets are chosen as the accompanying readings for the weekly Torah portion. Our passage, you'll see referred to in rabbinic literature as Merkava, or Maaseh Merkava, the chariot, or the event, or the kind of passage pertaining to the chariot. So here in the Mishnah and Tractate Megillah, we read, Ein maftirin b'merkava, v'Rabbi Yehuda matir. The position of the first, anonymous teacher is that we don't use as a Haftorah reading the account of the divine chariot. That is Ezekiel chapter 1. We see here, one may not conclude the Torah reading with reading from the prophets the account of the divine chariot. And the explanation says, so as not to publicize that which was meant to remain hidden. And Rabbi Yehuda permits it. And you may know that, in fact, we follow the ruling of Rabbi Yehuda. And on the first day of Shavuot, the selected Haftarah reading is Ezekiel chapter 1. It's fascinating when we get to the end of chapter 1, we'll see that chapter 1 is not the end of the prophetic experience. In a sense, it's the end of the vision, but it's not the end of the prophetic experience. After Ezekiel sees everything that he sees, he hears a voice, and chapter 2 begins with God's word coming to him. So this is really all a vision which is a prelude to a message from God. But it's interesting that the Haftarah that we read on Shavuot really is just chapter 1 of Ezekiel. So it really winds up being just confined to the vision. And one could maybe argue that that's sort of what Rabbi Yehuda and the sages are arguing about. The initial opinion says, you can't read this because it's a mystical vision on its own, and it can lead to so much confusion. It's overly focused on mysticism. And Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, there's a lot of, complex things that are hard to understand in light of the idea that we generally understand that God does not have a corporeal essence. But this is a vision which introduces a prophecy, and that's more common. And so maybe it's okay when we think about it in its broader context. And there are other possible explanations for their debate, but we already notice. Remember, last week in our introduction to Ezekiel, we noticed that one of the challenges of Ezekiel in the canon is that it contains things that seem to contradict the Torah. Ezekiel has various laws of how he understands temple practices to take place in a future temple, which contradict the Torah's laws of how priests are meant to behave or how the temple is meant to be. And so there were those who wished to hide away the book of Ezekiel and not canonize it until someone came along and resolved all the seeming contradictions. So one issue we have to start with Ezekiel is its legal material somehow seems a little bit at odds with the accepted traditions. Now we open up chapter 1 and we already have questions of censorship coming in. Okay, we canonize this book. But can we read publicly its opening chapter? And from there, we move on to a second question. Forget even, a public reading. What about study? So in Tractate Chagiga, chapter 2, Mishnah 1, we now get into the question not just of what can be publicly read, but also what can be studied and interpreted and expounded. Unclear whether this is talking about kind of a culture of public lectures or just, what was on the curriculum of study in the study halls. But the Mishnah says, Ein dorshin ba'arayot bishlosha. You can't expound the topic of forbidden sexual relations, but in front of 3 or more people. Velo b'maaseh breshit b'shnayim. Can't expound on the story of creation before 2 or more individuals. Again, these things are liable to be misunderstood, taken out of context, so they have to be taught and expounded in a very cautious, particular way. And then velo v'merkava b'yachid ela im kein haya chacham umevin midato. And you know what? You can't even expound the passage of the divine chariot, Ezekiel chapter 1, by yourself. Just to open up Ezekiel chapter 1 and read and interpret it on your own, says the Mishnah, you're not supposed to do, unless you are someone who's wise and understands things on your own. So some things we're concerned about how they might be misunderstood by a group, but our chapter Ezekiel 1 is something which we're concerned may even be something that any one individual reading will be led astray. And in fact, some of the teachings about Acher, about Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, was that it was some of these mystical teachings that kind of turned his mind and made it difficult for him to kind of maintain a traditional outlook. So, as we enter into this, we recognize that the sages saw this as a very edgy kind of text, and that we have to approach it with care. Again, presumably because of the idea that it is describing something more physical or perceptible about God. And our general understanding is that God is incorporeal. And so how do we make sense of this is the kind of the question we're going to be carrying with us. On the other hand, kind of remarkably, we actually see, even though the rabbi said you have to be so careful about expounding it, they learn lessons from this very text. For example, in Brachot I think it is chapter 1 still, page 10b, the rabbis say this, Amar Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Hamitpalel tzarich sheyechaven et raglav. We get a law about posture during prayer. When praying, a person should kind of align their feet. Keep your 2 feet, your 2 legs straight and together. Shene'emar v'ragleihem regel yeshara. As it says, we'll see in a few minutes in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 7, about these winged creatures in the midst of the stormy wind that Ezekiel saw. Their feet were a straight foot, right? You can hear kind of a grammatical complexity here. Ragleihem, their feet, regel yeshara, were a single straight foot. So how do you make your 2 feet into one straight foot? You put them straight next to each other, touching, and stand that way. That is how we understand angelic figures stand. And that is how we are instructed to stand when we say the central prayer, the Amidah prayer. And in fact, that is the practical halacha. When we pray the Amidah, we take our 3 steps back, our 3 steps forward, and then we stand with our feet together. And certainly this is true also when we stand up in the repetition for the Kedusha prayer, where we're very much literally invoking and evoking the practice and the words of the angels, that we stand in the same way. So on the one hand, the rabbis are telling you, don't even expound this, as an individual, and be careful whether you even read it in public. On the other hand, they absolutely even infer legal consequences from it. Now, we can say those were the angels, not the vision of God, and so maybe there is a difference there, but certainly the chapter was undoubtedly studied and interpreted. Let me just point out one more thing before we jump into the text itself. There's lots of discussion about exactly, this is the Gemara's commentary on that Mishnah we saw in Chagika about not expounding the details of the divine chariot. Of course, the rabbis tell lots of stories about, how did people do it and did they do it, etc. And the Gemara says, Ad hechan ma'aseh hamerkava. When you say you can't study even as one individual unless they're kind of seasoned and wise, can't study the chapter 1 of Ezekiel or the design of the chariot, how far does that passage go? The chapter itself is 28 verses long. And so Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, until the second time it says va'ereh, and I saw, that's verse 27. So you have to end 2 verses before the end of the chapter. And that has to do with the fact, probably, that verse, let me just jump to, there's a debate in the Talmud when we say up to, do we mean up to and including or up to and not including? Here, presumably, we mean up to and not including, meaning you have to stop when you get to here. From what appeared as his loins up, I saw a gleam as of amber, what looked like a fire encased in a frame. And from what appeared as his loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was a radiance all about him. And the hymn that's being described here is Demut kemar'e Adam, alav milamala, al demut hakisei. On the semblance of a throne, the semblance of a human form. So what the rabbis are saying is, okay, you want to study the part about the angels, the wheels, the winds, that's fine. But when you get to the part where you look up and you see the throne, and on top of the throne is the semblance of a human form, that's where you got to stop. That's God. That could lead you to think that God has a body. And what some of the contemporary scholars suggest is, well, look, we actually have other passages around the Tanach where there are indications of God's body parts, God's hands, God's nose, God's movements. So why does everyone get so worked up about Ezekiel chapter 1? And what at least one wonderful essay in the Torah.com suggested is it's the fact that it says loins. Okay, God's extremities, that's one thing. But God's private parts, God's torso, that's just one bridge too far. That's too much. And so when you get to this verse, which actually sort of speaks about God's private nature and God's intimate body, that's what makes this chapter so extreme, so controversial. So it's not surprising that the rabbis say, the point where it ends is here, and after that is sort of a whole other um, a whole other realm. And so the Gemara, then goes on to say, can we teach that part? Do we teach it in generalities? But there's something specific to that point, the last two verses, that really, really stand out. And then comes this little passage about, the that I referenced at the beginning about this young person who was trying to expound the nature of this electrum or amber, and fire came out and consumed him. So, and it's actually from there that we go on to the passage that we looked at last time about the book of Ezekiel being potentially suppressed. So all these complicated pieces of the book are, we're encountering them as we get ready to begin. Let's actually jump right in and read the chapter with those words of introduction and caution, so to speak. And I'll share my screen again. Don't be afraid. Estelle, you want to start us off?
In the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles by the Chebar Canal, the heavens opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. The word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, by the Chebar Canal in the land of the Chaldeans, and the hand of the Lord came upon him there. I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance, and in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. Good Lord. In the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings. However, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg, and the feet of each were like a single calf's hoof, and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left, and each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Such were their faces. As for their wings, they were separated. Each had 2 touching those of the others, while the other 2 covered its body, and each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, without turning when they moved. Such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire. Dashing to and fro among the creatures was something that looked like flares.
Okay, pause here a moment. We're now going to
Good
skip
Lord.
a little bit from the creatures to the wheels. Graham, will you take over from verse 15?
Okay. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the 4-faced creatures. As for the appearance and structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl. All 4 had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of 2 wheels cutting through each other. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its four quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all four were covered all over with eyes.
Oy.
And when the creatures moved forward, the wheels moved at their sides. And when the creatures were born above the earth, the wheels were born too. Whenever the Spirit impelled them to go, wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Wherever the Spirit impelled them, and the wheels were borne alongside them. For the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. When those moved, these moved. And when those stood still, these stood still. And when those were borne above the earth, the wheels were borne alongside them. For the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. Above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse, with an awe-inspiring gleam as of crystal, was spread out above their heads. Under the expanse, each had one pair of wings extended towards those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body. When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the sound of Shaddai, a tumult like the din of an army. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. From above the expanse over their heads came a sound. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. Above the expanse over their heads was the semblance of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and on top, upon this semblance of a throne, there was a semblance of a human form. From what appeared as his loins up, I saw a gleam as of amber, what looked like a fire encased in a frame. And from what appeared as his loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was a radiance all about him, like the appearance of the bow which shines in the clouds on a day of rain. Such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of the Lord. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking.
Okay.
Oh boy.
um,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yo, like a lot of
Yeah.
likes and like a hippie talks.
Yeah.
Like, wow, like, man, like, wow.
And I want to encourage those who are able, I just was doing this. If you Google, Ezekiel chariot, in a Google search, you can specify after you get the search results across the top, different kind of categories, and you can click on images. And if you click on images, you just see all these remarkable renderings, um, of this vision. And it's kind of extraordinary just to think about, how people tried to create this, and imagine it. A lot of them focus much more on the wheels than on the animal faces. Some of them, it's hard
Wow.
to see the animal faces.
How do you get there again? I can get there. I would like to get
If you
there.
go to Google and you just Google something like Ezekiel chariot.
I tried to envision it and draw a picture,
Yes.
Wait,
and I
Yes.
couldn't.
Do
Ezekiel.
you
I
do you
couldn't.
know
It was just too much.
Yes.
what comes to my mind is, were there drugs in those days? I'm
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
I'm sure there were mind-altering substances.
I
Oh,
looked.
absolutely.
Who
That's all
needs that when you have the Word of God? That's
I'm sorry, that's drugs in its best form.
some of the most
Yeah.
amazing ones are ones that where you can really see like eyeballs all around the wheels.
Uh-huh.
It's really
Have you completed your introduction? You're gonna make more comments because I looked this up about the use of hallucinogens in those times, in those
Yes.
in those biblical times. But are you interested? I mean, I'm not trying to interrupt your.
Yes,
No, but that's
What you're saying.
thank you,
interesting.
Graham. I actually appreciate that. I want to say just a couple more things, and then I want to open it up for any comments or reactions. I think if we wanted to try to make some sense of the chapter, again, there certainly are, things that are hard to quite parse out. But what we are basically, if I were gonna, like I do any chapter, try to just take us through the overview. So, we have our introduction with Yechezkel identifying himself. We have this strange dating of the 30th year, which is very hard to place. But then in verses 2 and 3, we get the narrator, positioning us better. The 5th day of the month and the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. So we know we're around the year 592, 593. And the word of God comes to Yechezkel. We find out that he's a Kohen. He's in Babylonia by the Kavar Canal, and he's Yechezkel, son of Buzi. And we also have a little note there. I do want to show this in the text. It's worth not ignoring. Vatihi alav sham yad Adonai. This is the narrator speaking. This is not Yechezkel's own voice.
Yeah.
In this little parenthetical, the hand of the Lord came upon him. So that's something. Yechezkel doesn't say that himself. He doesn't mention the hand of the Lord, but the narrator says that. And it just begins with Va'ere. I looked. What does he see? First, he sees the stormy winds. We actually have to remember when we're trying to picture this for ourselves. It starts out with a stormy wind, a cloud, and fire. These are already things which also evoke the Sinai experience, a lot of the same features. In the center of that wind, it seems, or maybe in the center of the fire, there is a gleam. Okay, so we were imagining stormy winds like a tornado, and in the middle, there's fire, and we're seeing something in the fire. And the number of terms for light and sparkle in this chapter are very many. We already have Eish. We have Noga, which means, a radiant light. We have Chashmal. We're going to see more words later. In the midst, and by the way, it's also the things kind of moving towards a center, right? We have the storm, and then in the center is this gleam in the center of the fire, and then in the center of that is the figure. So we sort of have this sort of sense of the exterior and then moving towards the center. And it's quite interesting that word mitoch, center, actually we have in the very first verse. When it says that Yechezkel says about himself, I was in the community of exiles. The language is vani betoch hagolah. So he's in the middle of something, and he's envisioning this storm with these fire in the middle, and in the middle of the fire, the image of these 4 animals, these 4 creatures. They're all human bodies with 4 different faces and 4 wings and a straight leg. We find out that and then it gets a little confusing, but we have 4 faces and 4 wings. They're sort of fixed in position. Part of this seems to be the notion of the chariot, that the 4 are in these 4 corners, and they are not moving independently. They're somehow connected to each other and the wheels so that they move, as one, but they can't just kind of move off on their own direction. Then we get the 4 faces: the human, the lion, the ox, and the eagle. We then find out about the 4 wings, that 2 of them were kind of, stretching out over the creature and touching the adjacent creature, and 2 of them were wings that were covering the body. Then we get more of a sense of kind of these additional fire images. Along with the creatures, there was something that was like coals or embers of fire burning, kamare lapidim, like torches. We get the word noga again, and now we get barak, lightning. So we probably already have 6 or 7 words for fire and radiance and light. And then again, another one, mar'eh habazak, something that looks like flares is dashing amongst them. So kind of almost imagine like lightning flashes and moving light. And that's sort of part one: the storm, the light, the fire, the movement, the sparks, and the four human bodies with four different faces: lion, eagle, ox, and human, and their wings. And then the second half of the vision really is the vision of the wheels, right? Then I looked again. V'hinei ofan achad ba'aretz etzel hachayot la'arbat panav. There is a wheel on the ground next to each of the four-faced creatures. That it's unclear if that's just one wheel or if it's wheels by each face. And the wheels, interesting, are ofan betocha ofan, a wheel inside a wheel. You start to think of like almost I think it's a gyroscope, right? Wheels that are turning inside each other that may allow for more, multi-dimensional movement in more than one direction. And then we get the sense that, first we see the eyes all over the rims of the wheels, and then we're kind of really told in a number of verses that the creatures moved with the wheels. The spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. I think that's a way of sort of saying the wheels were alive. They had dynamism to them, and they moved with the creatures, and they moved when they were moved by the spirit. So we have all those sort of pieces. That takes us to verse 21. Get a little bit more, and then we get sort of more image and sound of their movement. Here now we get another sort of sense of light and sparkle, which is a sky kind of image above them, like ice or crystal. And then sound. So up until now it's been va'ereh, and this is what I see. Now va'eshma, et kol kanfeihem. So we're moving to the next sensory experience. When they move, Yechezkel hears the sound of their wings, and it's the sound of mighty waters. It's like the sound of Shaddai. That's a name for God. So whatever that means, a massive tumult of noise, like the movement of a great, army or camp. And then when they would become still, everything drooped and was quiet. There's a sound from up above, and that sort of draws Yechezkel's eyes up. And now he's looking above their heads of those chariot animal wheel components. He sees color. He sees something in the image of a throne. We see this something very similar to this. We're not going to go through all the parallels now, but just to point out, right at the Sinai in the second account of the revelation at Sinai in Exodus 24, we're told that the 70 elders of Israel with Moshe and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, Vayiru et Elohei Yisrael. They saw the God of Israel. Very similar language to what we had here in the beginning, a Mar'eh Elohim, or Mar'ot Elohim, visions of God. Same thing here. There's a vision of God, and beneath God's feet is a sapphire pavement like the sky in purity. That's very similar to what we have here, which is that there's a throne and a sapphire stone appearance. And then on top of that throne is the semblance of a human form. And then again, this really edgy verse with the gleam of amber from the loins up and fire from the loins down and radiance all around. And then it's interesting, after a whole chapter in which Yechezkel really tells us what he's actually seeing, now he gives us a kind of a metaphor that what he saw reminds him of, a rainbow after the rain coming out of the clouds, like a surrounding radiance. That's the mar'eh demut kevod Adonai, the appearance of the semblance of the presence of the Lord. And upon beholding it, he throws himself down on his face and he hears a voice speaking. Or just on that little bit, the semblance of the appearance of the presence of the Lord, if I can find it, the JPS Haftorah commentary, of course, comments on this chapter because it's the chapter in which we do read the Haftorah on Shavuot. And he says something, I just want to see if I can find it here. I'm not finding it now. He talks about the way in which there's, a lot of kind of caveating, so to speak, the image of the presence, of the appearance of the Lord, right? There's still a few layers of uncertainty that are being preserved in beholding what Ezekiel is beholding, but nonetheless, he tells us what he's beholding. So, Graham, I want to come back to you and then to my parents. Go ahead.
Well, um, I love it. It's like it's incredibly evocative, but I guess the question that keeps coming up is whether it should be held as like religious doctrine or a form of surrealistic art, religious art. And I looked into it, and as you probably know, Daniel and Jeremiah and Ezekiel were contemporaries, and but Jeremiah evidently stayed behind in Judah, but Daniel and Ezekiel were abducted and were living in Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just strange that they were contemporaries. But anyway, but these images and visions are surreal. I mean, a wheel within a wheel, concentric wheels with the spiritual part of it is that at the center of concentric wheels that go all the way down infinitely, they're at the center of infinitely concentric wheels is the silence of God. It's at the unmoving center of every wheel that turns. There's an unmoving center,
Mm-hmm.
and that so it's just a incredibly evocative, both on the religious and artistic. I mean, end of things. But you couldn't get anything more surreal from like a Salvador Dali, I don't
Yes.
think. So, and to the point of, have any scholars looked into the possibility of whether Ezekiel may have been using hallucinogens?
Yeah,
I
I have
mean,
no idea. It's a
It
really
certainly
interesting.
sounds that way.
because I have looked into it. I mean, I don't know. I've looked into it, and in that time period, the psychoactive form of acacia. It's ACACIA. It evidently has an innocuous form. It's just a fiber
Mm-hmm.
supplement type of thing, but it has also a psychoactive variant,
Uh-huh.
and it was in use during that time, and in religious rituals and parts of different communities, and as I was looking into it, acacia has something in common in its chemical makeup with ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, which is a hallucinogen used by shamanic, in shamanic rituals by some tribes in the Amazon, and it then that common ingredient or factor was DMT, uh, dimethyltryptophan, and anyway, it's all very fascinating to me about the ethnobotany, the ethnobotanical, I guess, ethnobotanical factors involved in religious rituals at the time. So anyway, and these chemicals are known to inspire some of the most fantastic mystical visions and so on. And it seems to parallel what Ezekiel is describing. And it was very, I don't know, it just really was thought provoking. This whole chapter to me.
Yeah.
Because it was evocative, it was
Yes. Totally.
it engaged my, like, what could that possibly mean?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, well, this person says it means this, that person says it means that. Let's put them together and see who comes out on top. And then, that kind of approach. It's like it actually provoked my own brain to go. It put my brain off balance, and then and my brain mind wouldn't stand for it, and so it went in there and kind of had to make order out of it some way.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think on that evocative nature or evocative point, I would just say like I think for me, if I were gonna like make, they make these kind of word clouds. If I was gonna make a word cloud of associations,
That kind of thing.
with the divine that come out of this chapter, it's like might and power and strength. That's kind of the whirlwind, the wind. It's light, that's for sure. Light and fire. And it's one thing I find interesting is sort of the dynamism, and the tension between movement and fixedness, right? So there's also the vertical dimension, um, but that sort of sense that the wheel, certain aspects are rigid, and the animals and the faces, certain aspects are rigid, and then other aspects are very, very filled with movement. Those are like the things that, I feel are the dominant themes, visual and conceptual themes.
Yeah.
Okay, so my parents, and then we'll come to Susan after that. Go ahead, Mom and Dad.
So I mentioned this once before to Ralph Stephen, and I'll share it with the class. I have no basis for this, but I think that everyone who became a prophet went through a learning process, an initiation process, and every one of those people saw the same things that Ezekiel saw. They experienced that. Only Ezekiel went into the detailed description of what it was he saw, but that was an experience of every prophet. Now, among the prophets, first is Moshe, who is the greatest prophet of all. And though the Torah doesn't say this, the rabbis say the patriarchs were prophets. So, I mean, a lot of people became prophets, and they all had this vision. And one more thing from the secular literature. In Thomas Mann's 4 volumes of Joseph and his brethren, he has one chapter in which he describes Joseph being taken up into heaven and experiencing, for what I remember, something very similar to Ezekiel's vision. And I think that explains Joseph's ability to interpret dreams, because he experiences God in a dream. So, the dreams are not the ideas of a teenager. They're from somebody who has actually experienced prophecy.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. And certainly, at least the commonality of initiation prophecies that have a fiery dimension to them, that much is already attested. Moshe with the burning bush, and Ezekiel with the seraphim, these fiery creatures. So it's clear that, the major prophets had some kind of initiation prophecy, with a fiery aspect to it. But it's an interesting idea that everybody had the same, God showed the same to everybody, and people described it or experienced it in ways, and that may even be true about figures that we, have even less of a sense of their initiation prophecies. Like, it's a wonderful consideration. Susan is next. Go ahead, Susan.
Right, I have my interpretation is very limited, and that is the chariot. This is a chariot. So where is inside? The inside of the chariot. And God appears, but he appears above it. So what is the purpose of the chariot? Other than to show all of these creatures or manifestations, but God does not use the chariot. He's above the chariot. So what's the purpose of the chariot?
Great. It's a great question. It's a great question. I think again, it's certainly ambiguous. It's just hard to get a sense, of course, of dimension and proportion. But when we say that God is above, so God is above, or that what Ezekiel beheld, um, was over the animals with the wheels. So it might be, and he does say that he sees the semblance of a throne. So you could imagine, the wheels and then some kind of seat is perched on top of it, and God is sitting on that seat. So it may be, like if you think about a carriage, I guess you have kind of the seat is elevated
Mhm.
and the wheels are below. So it's possible that, that God was really sitting on it and riding on it. It's interesting, the term that the rabbis use, and it overly influences our thought. We saw this in a couple of places in rabbinic literature, Maaseh HaMerkava, the design or the, accounting of the chariot. The truth is that in Ezekiel, the word chariot is never used. The word chariot is used only really, not an incredibly large number of times in the Tanakh. Pharaoh has a chariot and the Egyptians have chariots. There are certainly kings definitely have chariots. Probably the Book of Kings is where, the word chariot appears the most. There are references to God's chariot in other prophets, in Isaiah, but Yechezkel never actually calls it a chariot. So the rabbis are, importing from other places, from the notion that kings rode on chariots and other prophecies in which God is described as riding on a chariot, and they're, I think, overlaying that on this vision of Ezekiel. I do think it's compelling, and because otherwise, I think there's not a good answer to your question, which is what the animals and the wheels have to do with God. So I think that there's a motivation to put those all together and place God on it and imagine that it is something that God rides on. But you're right that it's not 100% clear in the text, and it's important to note that the text never actually calls this entire thing a chariot. That is the rabbi's interpretation. So I think you're pointing out something that's not clear in the text, but we do see that, that's how it has sort of traditionally been interpreted, so to speak. I see a step, and then on to Lance. Yeah.
I'll tell you frankly, I am actually repelled by this. And if it was necessary for these prophets to see their vision through drug addiction, how dare they be prophets for the Jewish people? That was my first reaction. I think it's dreadful. I'm sorry, but I seem to have the opposite reaction from everybody else.
That's okay. It's a great, it invites all kinds of reactions, so it's totally welcome.
Well, it's my reaction.
Yes.
God.
Lance, go ahead.
I'm going to answer Susan's question with one of my own. What is the relationship between Ezekiel's Merkava and the IDF Merkava?
I received an essay about this in my inbox recently.
The essay is in the chat.
Great.
Click on the blue link and you'll get that essay.
Okay. Great. So everyone's encouraged to hold on. I don't see it. You sure you hit it? You sent it in?
Look at the top.
At that, and I don't see any links.
No.
It's not there?
Nope. You want to send it?
It doesn't say, please click the link to access the essay, Vision and Theophany.
Yeah, it's there. It's the first one
there?
you sent.
Huh.
Another one?
Click on the link and you go to the essay.
And the Jewish people have to follow these shenanigans? These,
Yes. Okay. So yes, it's a fascinating point that Lance points out to us that an extremely important tank that's used by the IDF is called the Merkava. Now, it doesn't that doesn't have to mean, in light of Susan's question and my response as well, it doesn't have to be an association specifically with Ezekiel. There are chariots of all kinds throughout the Tanakh. The word appears 44 times in different forms across the Tanakh, and primarily it's Jewish and non-Jewish kings riding in their chariots. Actually, it's, I think, really primarily non-Jewish kings. I'm curious if a Merkava appears.
They can ride in their chariots, but it doesn't have to be super. I don't know.
So I think, as is often the case in Israel, biblical precedents serve as a powerful, antecedent for thinking about the cultural and societal institutions of today. And so the Merkava, I think especially, armies have, we don't have to, we know this very, very deeply. Armies have to do a lot of horrible things, and if there's a way to infuse spirit into military and help people feel that they're participating in something higher and holy, even though in my Shabbat Shuvah drush I argued that maybe there's downsides to that too, then there certainly can be a power for those participating to feel a spiritual dimension of what they're doing. And so drawing in or drawing on biblical precedents, that overlap with something divine or spiritual can lend that dimension to the difficult, painful work that armies have to do. So yes, the Merkava is one such example. I'm sure there are others in the IDF, which I don't know off the top of my head. Dad, you still have a hand up for another comment?
Yes. Our daughter had friends in Washington Heights, a married couple who had at least 3 children, maybe 4, I'm not sure. And they named their children for different words related to light. I remember one for sure was Noga, and one may have been Zohar, which means brilliance.
Yeah.
Have to ask Lisa what their names were, but they were musicians, music teachers. They've since moved to Germany where they're teaching. But I just wondered, I wondered if that couple were prophets.
Yeah.
Not if they moved to Germany.
All right, let's see if we can do them quickly. Lance and then Graham.
Okay, I have a quick question. Doesn't the Talmud say that Ben Abuya questioned God's benevolence while watching 2 men, one doing the right thing and being killed, one doing the wrong thing and living?
Doing the killing.
I definitely remember the right thing and being killed. I don't remember.
It's about the mother bird.
Right, correct. I don't remember the other half, but that could be. But I think there is another tradition about Elisha ben Abuya that also has to do with these these prophetic sections.
Oh, and one final question, if I may. Which prophets were the last to hear from God directly?
It's a fascinating question. I think rabbinic tradition says it's Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi.
My answer is?
Tell me.
Jesus and Muhammad.
Okay. All right. A good pluralistic response. Okay. Did we have Graham for one last comment?
Well, okay. I mean, this is so fascinating to me. I am enjoying it. Anyway, the question seems to be like what Estelle was coming up with. The question seems to be coming up, is religious faith in Judaism something solid? Does it have to be something solid and unmoving, or is religious faith in Judaism some moving, and flowing, changing? Is religious faith, the image comes up, is religious faith a river or a parking lot?
I like fairy tales.
I mean,
also, Graham.
some people want it to be a parking lot, someplace where you can just put things and they're there and they're going to stay there and they're parked. And some people want it to be a river. Could both be true? I don't know.
Well, it probably is true in Judaism, but we all like fairy tales. I do.
Well, I think also people, and what I'm saying is people, along with liking fairy tales and visions and mysticism and so on, people also like solidity.
Yeah.
They like parking lot. They like stay there and just be there tomorrow and for all time, so we can use it as a reference point for everything we do and say and think and everything.
Is this
two
only
different-
what happens with the rest of Ezekiel? Does he continue on like this?
This is pretty. This is the most extreme version of this, but we are going to see references back in subsequent chapters to this vision. So we'll come back to it, but this is really stands alone, stands out, and like I said, I think maybe there's so much that's been written about it. We may spend a little time next week surveying some more of that literature before we go on to chapter 2. But again, keep in mind, I'm going to come to Ellen for a last comment. Keep in mind that we stopped in the middle. This was all the prelude. Of course, it stands on its own, but this is all the prelude to God's word. So we're in a cliffhanger here. This is what he saw. This is the beginning of what he heard. But then he heard a voice, and we haven't heard what that voice has to say yet. Ellen, comment?
I don't know whether it was in this class last time or somewhere else, but recently, when we talked about idols and why idols are such anathema to God. And it's because they are static, and because they're parking lots, and because they are corporal and they don't move and they don't change. And if you can hold on to it, even a vision of, I have a lot of trouble with this, with really concretizing this vision of the wheels and the creatures, and I get it, and then I lose it again, and then I get it and I lose it again. But that's what I think that's what all of Judaism is about. You cannot hold on to something and picture it and put it into this parking lot.
Yeah.
Man, I agree.
Good.
Beautiful.
I guess I'm alone.
The movement back and forth between fixed and changing might be one kind of lens through which we could view Judaism. So
I mean, God has to be changing.
yes.
Otherwise,
God also has to be unchanging.
well, yes, but it had, our relationship changes with God.
Without a doubt. All right, I'll leave you here to continue musing, imagining, and researching. And
very evocative.
Oh, Debbie, yes, Deborah, please.
What I find fascinating is that in this description are the elements of light and dark and color and fixed and changing. So it's an all-encompassing and in many ways frightening picture.
Beautiful.
And
yes.
Is that our view of the essence of our religion?
Well, this is only one vision, but it changed a lot. But it's a beautiful question. It's right. Also, the sort of the bringing together of opposites.
Absolutely
Also
right.
a feature of it, and that's that's also important.
That's a good question, Debbie.
Yeah.
In Buddhism, they call it the coincidence of opposites.
Yes. Okay, we have a hard stop, Lance. Please keep it for next time. We don't want to miss the opportunity. And wishing everyone wonderful rest of the day. Love to mom and dad. Take care.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any other similar surprising images such as this?
I mean, I think this is I do think this is one of a kind in its breadth and depth and specificity and majesty and mystery. I think it really does stand out. So we have a treat to have it. Good
Thank
day,
you.
everybody. Take care.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.